Hey, what's up everybody? Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics, and today's video is going to be on landscapes. I've been dodging this one for a little bit, but I think it's time to finally bring it to you since I've had multiple requests for this. I'm using Sketchbook Pro, and I'm drawing on a Wacom Cintiq. You can draw on whatever you like. I've even been drawing on an iPad lately, and that's yielded some decent results. Still not like a Cintiq here, but you overcome the tool. So here we go. So at any rate, landscapes, I'm going to show you a 1, 2, 3 kind of method. I can't remember where I picked this up, but kind of works out nicely for comic book illustration. So what I mean by that, we're going to do like a jungle scene here, and I'm going to designate, first I'm going to do a really rough sketch. Let's just get that out of the way. And what I'm going to do here is I want to put some things in the immediate foreground. And so the 1, 2, 3 kind of method is immediate foreground, midground, and background. Now obviously you can do a lot more variations of that to give yourself a very nice, depthy type of scene. But the thing I like about doing it this way is if you're like me and maybe you got to fumble through it sometimes, this is a nice way to get you to get through it and not spend an absorbent amount of time on one particular scene. So, if you break it down this way, it helps you kind of look at it like, what's important and not overdoing things that are not important. So let's try it and see if I can explain that in better detail. Now, one of the things I think work really well in a background is when you have something really close to the camera and it's being cut off. It helps build depth, and that's one of the things I want to show you about doing landscapes. And I'm going to do a series of these videos. There's going to be a couple because landscapes are such a broad spectrum, and there's all these different things that rules and techniques that can be applied, that I figure I'll do some that are foliage based, some that are like cities, really dramatic perspectives, things like that. But I want to start with the basics. So this 1, 2, 3 method, this will be what I'm going to consider, layer 1 or whatever. And, I'm going to put like this rock texture up front. And one of the things that helps convey a good background, besides lots of little details, is the size relation of those items. So let's take like another tree branch coming in this way, so it shows that we have like a lot of foliage or whatever. And again, I should keep this part really rough, not try to detail at this stage. I want it to be like a jungle scene. I think like some cool kind of vines hanging would be neat. The other thing is to take the leaves. I'll tend to try to draw them in one shape at first. Well, where you have those where they're kind of drooping down and around. Always remember to put things in front and behind of the objects. That always lends to the convincing structure of it. You don't want everything just one shape. Everything, kind of behind. These leaves can come in front of branches, behind branches, stuff like that. Just kind of scribble it in there and get an idea. And another thing that you can do at this stage, if you want to really show some depth, even in the beginning here, if you notice I drew the tree kind of up like that, right? Well, that's just because it's easy and quick and I can explain what I'm doing faster. But if I wanted to make this look really cool, why not draw this tree going back into perspective, kind of bent, and then twisting, something really wild and crazy like that. And then I do all the fancy shading, schmading to get it to look like it's recessing back into space. I'm not going to do that on this particular video because it's more time consuming, but I just want to show you, don't always think in terms of, up, down, left, right. You gotta envision this as a 3D space. Okay, so, and I'll still consider this some of the foreground, but I'll do a couple little elements. Like if you're going to do a jungle, there's going to be a lot of different types of foliage or plants. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but all these different types of plant elements. So, pull some reference if you're not familiar with, what they look like and things like that. I'm just going to kind of make some things up. Maybe this is, some foreign land that hasn't been discovered yet. Who knows? possible. I think there's some that go like this. I'm going to tell you another quick little tip here, and is save layers of this stuff. If you're working digitally, why not? You know, you could save a few different styles of these plants, and you can copy them and move them around the scene. And maybe I'll go ahead and do that in this video just to show you. And then you can basically change, you know, each one. So like, well, for instance, like this particular area doesn't look right to me. Neither does this. I might look at reference. I think they come out like this, then back, and then down one more time, if I remember correctly, because I've drawn these a few times. And I think each segment's like a little bit thinner, almost like the way fingers would work. Yeah, that's looking more correct. So, you know, at any rate, this isn't to show you how to draw the plants. You just look that up and study them and draw them in your own fashion. But I want to show you how by overlapping some of these different types of looking plants that you get this jungle looking scene. And, you know, the other thing is to make sure that they're not all, like, for instance, that they're not all thin like this. Some are going to be really thick leaves like this. You know, again, maybe closer to the camera. Show different bends. And remember to, you know, put some that are entirely in shadow. Some that are halfway in shadow. You know, just kind of play with the shadows and get those looking right and depthy or whatever. Okay, so we'll say that this is all part of our layer 1. Which it's almost a little bit into the midground, but this, let's say this is foreground. You know, even another tree going this way. Make sure to make the trees and the branches go in different directions. Okay, so we'll call that our foreground, layer 1. Let me just rename this real quick. Foreground 1. Okay, so now for the midground, add another layer. Put that behind this layer. Now, one of the ways you could do it, which is kind of neat for the layering setup, is you can actually select all this, fill it with white. You know, for the rough sketch, I'm not going to worry about that, but that's something you can do to make the layering process work a little bit better. So, okay, so now layer 2 is going to be our midground, and the midground will start getting in a little bit more of the, you know, ground texture or whatever, ground shape. You know, usually I'll fill in the shape of the ground first, something like this, and then I can drop in more of the plants and heavy foliage and whatever I'm trying to do there. So again, with the trees, you know, try to make them all different shapes, and, you know, look at reference for what you're trying to do. You know, jungle trees often, you know, lean over, I think, from the stuff I've looked at. They have a nice variety of different plant life to make a cool jungle scene, you know, so you can just really mix up the shapes and try all kinds of stuff. And another cool technique I want to show you in this video, even though it could almost be an entire video on its own, but it's a neat effect. This is obviously what I'm doing here is a line sketch, right? You know, this is more what I'm comfortable with, what I was, you know, kind of grew up with as far as illustration was, you know, always roughing out my lines. So if you're not comfortable with finding your shapes this way, another way to do it is like this. I'm going to add one more layer and show you real quick, then we'll get back on track here. Grab a larger brush. Let's see, let's try. I think this one sizes up pretty good. I will use this. Okay, now turn it to like a, you know, a nice light gray, something like that, a medium gray. And sometimes if you're having a hard time figuring out your shapes like this, come in with a larger brush like this and just block in, you know, some of your stuff. I'll show you what I mean here real quick. Sometimes it's even quicker, you know, so you got to play around with it and see which stuff matches your style. You know, maybe this doesn't work as well for you. Maybe you're more of a line guy like I am, but it's good to play around with different techniques like this. and just really loosely fill in some of the plant life, you know, the vines and stuff, the kind of dangling stuff. You could throw a snake in there if you wanted, you know, whatever. But the beauty of doing it this way is sometimes it helps you kind of envision your scene a little bit better or a little bit differently. I think it's good for removing mental roadblocks. Like, you know, there's times when you go to sketch or draw and the thing that you're used to somehow doesn't perform well for you. You can get through it, you know, just by staying at it and going with the fundamentals of what you know in art. But sometimes attacking something from an entirely new perspective kind of frees up that mental roadblock. So that's why I wanted to show you this. And you can really just have fun with it, you know. And the thing is, you should get better at recognizing your silhouettes anyways. You know, I've probably talked about that in a lot of my videos at this point. Silhouettes are very significant of good storytelling, good art, you know. Like, it's why you could see, you know, a dark silhouette in an alley, you know, a nice rendition of that, and it can have little to no interior details, and you can feel the mood, you can tell exactly what's going on just by some really strong silhouettes. So it's important to practice those. And, you know, as I'm drawing these really ugly trees right now, but you know, it's the kind of practice that you get from that. And I'm more of a line guy. I overly sketch my stuff, like I said, but this is a good way to try that out for yourself and see what works. And what you could do from there is, after you get some of these silhouettes put in, and I did trees, but I need to add, you know, more of the variety of plant life. So let's try like some bigger, you know, fern looking deals. I don't know the plant names either, so forgive me for that. So we'll just do something that looks like a jungle plant, something that's got big leaves that leans over, and it, you know, it's just real blocky, you know. I don't know if that's exactly what the silhouette would look like. It almost looks like just a crazy hairdo or something, but you get the drift anyways. And, you know, you could have some that's just like a bed of the same thing, almost like a tall grass, kind of mixed patches of that in there too. You could even have you know, a little moat or a little bit of, you know, water and a few things coming out of that. Whatever. So you just, you know, mix it up, keep playing around with it, throw in some rocks. Now, the other thing, this scene looks pretty messy at this point, but it's starting to come together. You're starting to get a bit of a look of what it would be. Now, from here, I could tone this down and I could just outline my line work, or I could just use the gray. It doesn't really matter. So whatever you're comfortable with there. But it's real easy to tone this line work down and then go back. What is it, layer 2? I actually got them out of order. Let's move that one down. Go back to my layer 2. Grab my pencil tool and now refine the lines a bit. Now, what's neat about this process too is you can get in here and start adding little style choices and details a lot more confidently because of that sketched out shape layer. So that's the other cool benefit of working this way. So it's really worth a shot at trying and seeing if you got a a knack for this type of drawing choice or whatever. I don't know what to call it, but okay, so something like that, you know, and just sketch around it and build your lines, whatever. Okay, so now the other thing that I want to get to before I do the last stage, which would be the background, and then I'll clean this all up, add some shadows and stuff like that. We'll go over what I would think to do for shadowing also. The one thing that really pulls a scene like this together is scale, you know, and we've got a few scale type objects. You know, we've got some rocks here. Well, I guess rocks aren't a good scale type object because rocks can be any shape, size, whatever, so that's not a good scale object. Neither are the plants. I guess the trees would be the best one at this point, but we need something else to give it scale. So we're just going to throw, you know, a little guy in here real quick, and I'll show you what I mean by that, and we'll put him on its own layer too. Oh, I'm wondering why my marks aren't that dark. It's because I got a gray pencil. Alright. Sheesh. Awkward. Alright, so anyways, we're going to put a guy in here for scale, and I'll show you the benefit of doing that. You know, I'll just have him like, you know, he doesn't know what he's doing here. Like, hey, what's going on, man? I guess I could have did some kind of Tarzan character, but I like to monetize my videos, so I'm not going to put anything that could be construed as copyright infringement. That stuff is messy. So there's our little stick man dude. He's like, what's up? Where am I? We'll pretend he was just dropped in the middle of this jungle, unbeknownst to him. He doesn't know what he's doing here, why. Alright, there's our little dude. Okay, so give him some funky shorts. There we go. And a half shirt. Somebody put him in a half shirt too. Poor guy. What a V-neck. That's heinous. Okay, so anyways, here's our crazy little guy with this crazy Bermuda shorts or whatever those are. So now we've got scale. Now all of a sudden the scene, you know, almost to me anyways, and let me know if you don't agree, but to me it gives it a lot more solidarity. Like you can almost see into the scene a little bit more and have an idea. Now the same regard as if we're to take this guy, and you can't scale him down too much, but say you scale him down a bit further, you don't place him any further back in the scene, all of a sudden the trees look more massive now. Same thing if we scaled him up and we left his feet in the same position, they look like tiny trees, or he's a big guy or whatever. And then if you bring him forward scaled up, he's just closer to the camera and, you know, obviously in front of the rocks and a lot of the trees and stuff now. So I think somewhere in the range of, you know, kind of where we had him, something like that gives a good scale and a good, you know, size to the scene, you know. Now we'll go ahead and tone him back just a little bit. I don't want him to, he's not the focus. He's just, like I said, he's a way to give a little more grounding to the scenery. Okay, so the last one will be the very background, and I'll draw this with the dark so we can see it pretty well. And this is where I would add like these mountains off into the distance, you know, overlapping mountains. Actually, those should oftentimes in a scene like this be about 2/3 of the way up on the scene. Can't remember exactly why. I think that's a perspective alignment choice, but I can't remember exactly why. And then, you know, obviously the shape of the sun or moon, or depending on the time of day and where it's at in placement to those mountains. The foliage is pretty tight, so we're not going to see much of the background. Now what you could do is you could take some of these trees and you could show the tops of them back here in front of the mountains. So you could, you know, just do a shape of the trees, some of the, you know, what do you call them? Branches, stalks, whatever, the, you know, the bottom of the trees, you could see a little bit of that. Now, the thing to keep in mind when doing that, though, I actually shouldn't have drew this darker. I'll tone it down here in a second. But I want to be able to see what I'm putting in. But I want to make sure to tell you that as far as layering this stuff goes, the stuff in the background should be the lightest. So I should tone this down, even though it's a, you know, this would be a more of a sketch at this stage. But the stuff in the very background element should be the lightest. So we'll call this background. This will be the 3 in our 1, 2, 3 rule, if that's even a rule. Actually I had the 3 there. Just want to make this very apparent. And there's our guy for scale. There's our foreground 1, midground, which really is a combination as I started to sketch these. So I guess what I'll do is I'll go back to here and I'll just sketch a little bit of this real quick. And then what I'll do at the end of this video is I'll time lapse me cleaning this up. I'll give you a little bit of information about what I plan on doing with the shadows, and then I'll time lapse it and just at least a little bit and clean it up and make it look a little more presentable. But I really like keeping things rough, especially at this stage. It allows me to feel out the idea process and not get hindered by over rendering something. So it's always a good idea to keep everything as rough as possible till you really know you have a confidence level of what you're getting ready to do. Then go through and do all your fancy little rendering and line work and cross hatching or whatever, but don't jump to that. You should block in your shapes, block in your shadows, really define the scene and the depth and where your area of focus is going to be, and then go in and do your rendering, because rendering can eat up a lot of time, and you can do a lot of wasteful rendering. So make sure you really know exactly where you're taking the scene. Okay, so this gives me an idea anyways of what I want to see happen here. Okay, let me see if I can get rid of the, yeah, that's good enough. I mean, it's still rough, but that's what I want. Okay, so there's our scene. We got our elements. This is our midground, so let me label that. Midground, I believe that's 2 words. And I forgot to do the number again. Sorry. 2. Okay, so we got midground, foreground, background, 1, 2, 3. So midground is in here, 2, and then background, where'd it go? Oh, right there. Background 3, back here. So that's how I would structure it. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this way of looking at it, even though this one's going to be packed with details, almost a little too much, the reason why I want you to think of the setup like that is if you do that with each panel, and you don't over concern yourself with just detail everywhere, you look at it foreground, middle ground, background, character element, you can move through your panels and your scenes quicker. And you can oftentimes, I hate to say this, but you can find your cheats, and your cheats are when you can block in large areas of shadows, when you can throw an effect in a certain area, and you're going to have to do that to get through a book because they just take so long to illustrate. If you did everything with full detail, you'd just be there forever. So okay, so now the next thing that I would do, as far as obviously refining this, but I would block in my shadows a bit. So let me show you that, because I know that's an area that we all struggle with. So let me grab my pencil here. Let me scale this sucker up real big. I think I have to grab the hard pencil to sorry, that sounded bad. To get it to be large enough to block in the shadows. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to call this our shadows. Okay, I want no value in there. I just want, like, to be able to block in large areas. Did I name that? Let's call this shadows. Now, the reason why I like doing this way is it's real easy to get a little bit confused with your shadows. So you see our light sources right here, right? So what I'm going to picture now, I would always look at a scene like this and I would say, okay, how much shadowing, how much mood do I want here? Do I want 50% shadows on everything, or main objects, or 20%, or whatever? So what I would consider 50% is where half of this tree is in shadow, like that, the bulk of it. Half of this tree is in shadow. So that's one way to look at it, to simplify it. If not, you can just, again, you can spend time over rendering, but I'm going to say a little bit less shadows than that. I'm also going to maybe put the shadow to this part of the tree, and then from the rendering stage, if you can see where I'm at, this has light, this has a little bit of light. So, and I'll even move it to the one side a little bit more. So like right about there. And that'll be the bulk of the shadow on that part of the tree. And then from there, go into the little, rendering and bark and, maybe a couple spot shadows, so it doesn't look too, you don't want this nice straight line up the back of the tree, or it's going to look like a telephone pole or it's not going to look accurate. So you just mix it up and do some texturing in there. But I'm not going to explain all that because it'll just take too long. But I'll do like, some quick bulk shadows. So, and like I said, this is a quick way to get an idea for where you're going to come in on the next stage and refine it. So, and you'll see it's really fast to just throw this in and get a better idea. Now the other thing to keep in mind is that the stuff that's closer to the camera, so your foreground layer, is going to be a lot darker. So you're going to have a lot thicker shadows, and that's going to actually happen naturally because it's closer, so you're going to be able to lay in bigger shadows regardless. But you want to keep that in mind. Like, it's really a rule in digital painting, but even in comics, you're just going to do that in in line work and shadow work. So it's still the same rules apply. So if you study a photo, you'll notice that a landscape photo or whatever, that the elements in the foreground are not only more visible usually as far as in focus, they're darker. And so what you do with that is you incorporate that, like I'm trying to draw on here. And then by the time I get back here, I'll make the lines more faint. Some lines I'll have little missing pieces maybe, especially by the sun. We'll call that a sun. And lastly, you can actually fade that layer off and make it look like it's disappearing a little bit in the distance. So just something to keep in mind that would probably make the scene more convincing. And keep in mind that I'm not saying you can't do it the other way. You can always make style choices. I want to really stress that, I guess, because I get people every now and then that'll look at certain pieces of my work and they'll go, oh, you messed up here, or you did this funny, or this looks weird. And sometimes they're talking about merely style choices I made, and I have to, and don't get me wrong, I always take criticism constructively. You won't grow as an artist if you don't, and you can't be a professional if you can't, develop a hard skin for that. But that being said, if it's something that's a style choice, that's your choice as an artist, as a creative person, to make something look the way, especially in comics. That's why I really can't believe people get so picky and critique, comic work. About the best thing you could say is that, hey, it's not my cup of tea or something. But really, a lot of times comics is overly style and less accuracy, in my opinion, anyway. So, let me know how you feel about that. That's just my my take on it. But don't let that discourage anybody from critiquing my work, because I actually do need the critiques, and that's how I get better and improve. I got to be able to know what other people are seeing out there and what they feel, and try to get better at it. So, all right. So now the shadowing of the tree here. This always can be tricky, but I start with some bulk shadows, and definitely really spotty because of the way that the leaves obviously overlay, and then just kind of bounce that in and out, and I'll refine that again on the next stage. Okay, and then you got the shadows obviously from the trees, so you're going to want to spot in a lot of shadowing here, shadow that's on the water. The water will do something like this with all the reflections. Maybe a little duck. Let's be a little duck right there. Duck. No. There's probably no ducks in the jungle. Okay, so I would say I'm definitely sure there's no ducks in the jungle. I don't think they could cut it. Yeah, so just spot it in, put a little shadow under our character. And that's that's about it. Hopefully from there you can see where it's going. So, and it's messy, but it still pulls it together a little bit more. Now back here, I would probably just silhouette the trees and then tone down the layer, but I'm not entirely sure yet. I think that's what I would do though. So it just look like, blobs with some branches and little pieces, but then I would just tone down that layer to make it look like it's recessed back. And I think the reason that occurs, just so you know, I know in painting, I believe the reason it's looked at like that, or the way that we see landscapes like that, is because the further back something gets, the more the atmospheric lighting gets in front of it or takes it over. Same reason why if you got a blue sky here, in a good painting, you'll notice that there's always a little bit of blue painted into the very background element. So yeah, at any rate. And the other thing that you want to try to do too is this overlapping of shadows. So you go dark, light, and by doing that you can create more depth. And there's also some negative drawing that you can do into this when you go to ink it. I'm not going to do that, or maybe I'll do a little bit of it, but I'm not going to speak about it so much. I need to study that a bit more. That is going to be one of the upcoming videos on this channel, just so you know. I've already had the request. I've already responded back to people and kind of, you know, said, hey, we are going to do that one. I want to feel a little bit more comfortable myself with it before I go saying, hey, this is how you do it, and you know, I know what I'm talking about, when I just don't feel as confident with it. Okay, so one more little scale thing that I always like to do is in the very background, just a couple little birds like that. See, actually it'd be pterodactyls at that size. Let me make them a little smaller. Tiny little birds. Just little things like that give the, you know, scene scale. I don't know if anybody ever see that. And you do like a little frog right here or something, you know. That's a frog, kind of. You could do a snake on the branch, and all these things that just liven it up a bit. Oh, and more of the vines. Vines are cool. I always add a lot of cool effect to the scene. All right. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is, I know this thing looks like a mess, so I want to show you that it can turn into something halfway decent here. So I'm going to go ahead and time lapse the next portion and see what we can come up with. Okay, so now we've got our form down, our basic sketch, and I'm just going to start going over this and refining it. So first thing I do is kind of outline everything. I start building in a little bit of texture. You know, I do the shape of shadows, and then I come in and texture it a little bit more, trying to do some of the tree bark. Yeah, it's a lot of scribbling at this stage, but, you know, just a little bit more refinement than the stage previous. And sometimes I'll do that right there where I silhouette the shape and then paint back in with white. If it's already a predominantly dark object, then it makes more sense to maybe paint it all in and then come back with just the white highlights. And I bounce back and forth on that. I do a little bit of, you know, what I consider this being more sketching, where I'm drawing the shape, filling in the bulk of the shadows, and then texturizing the rock there, and then adding some line work. And I really just keep doing that all over everything. And I get a little too repetitive. Something to keep in mind is to try to add lots of variation. This whole scene is pretty much just a compilation or whatever of textures and shapes. So the more I can add a variety of textures, the more believable the scene's going to be. Especially a jungle where there's just a lot of different elements going on. There's a lot of foliage and plant life, and they all need to have a little bit different feel to them. Now, I do some copy work where I take advantage of, you know, the layer system, and I'll copy a few things. But it just kind of makes sense because there's going to be such a heavy overlay of stuff that you can kind of get away with that here. So I'll make sure to do a few varieties of the type of plant life, and then I'll, you know, copy, move some things around, add some distortions, rescale, you know, especially with leaves and branches and things like that. So, and so you see I do that right there where I copy the layer. And this one ends up getting a real layer intense, so you got to kind of be mindful of that. But I don't know. It's just the way I work, and it seems to work out for me, so that's what I do. But it does get a little tricky, you know, when you have so many layers you're trying to figure out and rename them and see where they're at. And you got to create groups and things like that to clean it up. So, you know, this right here, I'm drawing another plant, and it's similar to the one I already had. Here I'm filling it in with white. That's what you see me painting in there, and I'll put that behind the other layer and merge it down. That way it's a solid, and then there I convert it to all black and change it up a bit, just again to get a little bit more variation and painting in some of the negative, which I like to do. And then I end up cheating a little bit more and using it for the tree leaves. And then I just place it in front and erase areas of it so that you can see the branch. And then, you can get the effect that part of it's behind it and part of it's in front of it. So that's another quick little, I hate saying cheat because I don't want people to think that, digital art is cheating. It's not. You still have to have all the fundamental knowledge of creating art to even get this stuff to look halfway decent. But there are little time savers that you can do. And when you're doing an intense scene, especially a background, I don't know, to me, I'm going to take advantage of those shortcuts because, for one, I like drawing characters. That's where I like spending my time. Backgrounds are a little bit more of a work to me, or an effort, I guess. If I could, I would just draw characters all day. But you got to have them in backgrounds to really, sell the scene and stuff. So, and then here I do some of these little leaves. And again, leaves are, or at least this type of leaves or foliage or whatever you want to call it, are a little bit more of a struggle for me. So again, I do the copy paste thing and I try to move them around, modify them a little bit. I put some dark ones in the back. I shade down the ones in the back, and which really that's backwards. I probably should have the shaded ones up front a little bit more, but the perspective I'm using these for is going to be for the tree top left right there. So I'm trying to kind of envision it. And again, I go to erasing spots because you'll notice when you study trees that there's always solid areas and then broken areas. And you see branches behind the areas that are less covered or whatever. So there again, I place the layer in front. I erase areas of it. I first tone the layer down, then erase it so that the tree shows through. And drawing yet another plant, just trying to give a little bit of variation in there so that they don't all look like copied plants. Some up front, some in the midground. And this part does get tricky with the layering. And then when I go through and I do the ground texture, I'm just kind of sporadic with it, and I'm just basically scribbling. I try to picture there's little rocks and little dark areas in the dirt and some little grassy spots, and I just play around with it. And again, adding more texture to the tree, more grass spots, just little things here and there to... And this part was fun. I actually liked doing this way. I just painted these vines in with black, did a little bit of separations, a little bit of pieces dangling, and that's it. Now I could have locked the layer and painted in some white, but I thought they looked pretty believable just like that. So, and now sketching out my little goofy dude that's sitting in the middle of the jungle like he doesn't know why he's there. He just kind of got dropped off in the middle of the jungle. Which reminds me of a movie. Can anyone think of that movie? I'm not going to say anything else. Who gets dropped off in the middle of a jungle? And it's a movie, not a TV show. Let's see if anybody can come up with it. Fun fact. Anyways, more scribbling. Love to scribble. And the reason I do that is because to me, texturing really, again, it separates the scene. It gives it all a different feel. And you can do that with just scribbling. It doesn't all have to be clean line work. In fact, you get to break up the scene more by having areas that are clean and areas that are gritty. So you got to remember to mix that up, and it'll in turn give you a better overall look in your scene, in my opinion. But yeah, so it's coming pretty close to the end. I just keep touching up, and now I'm adding a little bit more shading and some more at the very end. I always go back and do a little bit more line weight. So yeah, if you got any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. And hopefully this was enjoyable for you and taught you a thing or two about building backgrounds and landscapes. So let me know what you think. And as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and we will talk to you soon.